Hello everyone and welcome to our lesson on idioms. Thank you very much for joining. I hope you've all had a really nice day and a really nice week. Hello to everyone in the chat and thank you for those messages informing me that you will not be present next week. Of course, it's the last day before the weekend and we want to try and have an interesting lesson. And I thought that idioms would be a really nice way to end the week. So we're going to start just with a brief overview about the lesson and about the lesson yesterday, just to make sure everyone has understood the content. So just quickly about our company. Our name is Cercle and we're based in Paris. And our job is to help you speak English more fluently. We have a fantastic student community here in our lessons. And if you have any questions, please do come to the live lessons and feel free to ask anything you want to me. I'm here to help and we provide these free lessons to give you some additional content during these challenging times. So thank you again for joining. So my first question based on the lesson yesterday is again just to encourage student participation in the chat. So if you could just answer this question however you like. The question is, what is something you have never done? So we spoke about adverbs of frequency yesterday. And adverbs of frequency are words we use to describe how much we do something. For example, it's very common that you want to describe to someone how often or how much you do a particular action or thing. It could be related to work, or it could even be related to your personal time. So in this question, the adverb here is never. In French, this translates to jamais. So, what have you never done? While I'm waiting for some responses, I'm going to quickly talk a bit more about idioms and why I chose this lesson today. Idioms are very specific phrases in English, which are used in businesses, in the business environment, and also for different personal environments. And hopefully in the lesson today, we can get to learn a bit about each other. I can learn more about you and you can learn more about me. So let's start by looking at some things in the chat. So Anya has written here, I've never been in America. Fantastic, Anya. America is a wonderful country and it has loads of interesting history. Just very quickly, if we're talking about visiting another country, we normally talk about going from somewhere to another location. So for example, I could say, je marchais or je marche à Paris. I walk to Paris. It's a direction. So we need to say, I've never been to America, but a really good sentence. Thank you, Anya, for that. Elodie has written here, I have never been in a hot air balloon. So a hot air balloon is a really big mode of transport. And I believe the French word is ballon. C'est un grand ballon dans le ciel. And it's where you can get a really nice view of the surrounding villages or cities or towns. I would love to go on a hot air balloon ride. It looks very interesting. So my next question is, what is something you always do? So just before I read some more answers, I said we could learn about each other today. So something I have never done. I think similarly to Anya, I've never been to South America. I would love to go to South America because I think it has a really interesting natural landscape. So the next sentence that I have asked is, what is something you always do? So the adverb in this sentence is always. This is this is something you do nearly every day, okay? It's something you do on a regular basis. So my sentence is, I always brush my teeth. I always try to maintain a good dental hygiene. So let's have a look at some other suggestions. Hopefully they're more interesting than mine. So, what do we always do? Okay, so Delphine has written, I practice always sport. A fantastic answer, Delphine, and I'm interested to learn what sport you practice. Just a very quick point. As we mentioned yesterday, the adverb of frequency normally comes before the verb. So the verb in your sentence is pratiquer, to practice in English. So we need to put the adverb before practice. So the sentence would be, I always practice sport. But a really good sentence. Thank you very much for that. Nariman works out every day. She always does exercise. Fantastic. Anya always has problems with speaking English. Well, I'm glad that you've taken the time to come to these lessons to help Anya, and we're happy to help you out. Okay, some fantastic sentences, and thank you all for contributing. I would like to start the lesson now, so we'll move on, but please do read the other suggestions in the chat. And the lesson today, an idiom is as I mentioned, it's an expression. It's a group of words in English which on their own have no specific meaning, but when we put these words together, they mean something different. So please don't worry if that confuses you. We'll talk about some examples, and we normally use these to talk about things that have happened in businesses or in our personal lives. So that's why I say that we can learn something about each other. We have a lot of, as I mentioned before, a fantastic community of students, and I would love to know more about you. So we have 4 categories we're going to talk about today. And in all of these categories, we're going to learn some idioms which, when used, can make you sound much more fluent in English. I think idioms are a lesson that I normally save for more advanced students. If you do have trouble understanding, I will more than happily explain multiple times for you. So let's talk about the first category, and that is money. Okay, so let me write down the first question, and I would like you to tell me what you think it means. To tell me what you think it means, sorry. So tell me about a time you got ripped off. So I'll repeat the sentence. Tell me about a time you got ripped off. So the specific part of the idiom here is ripped off. And now the verb to rip is if I take a piece of paper and I rip it like this. That's what the verb means, to rip. But if we use it in a sentence and talk about getting ripped off, and again we see this verb get, what do you think it means? What do you think it means to get ripped off? It's a common expression that I use sometimes with my friends and family. You could also use it in a business scenario. Okay, so right now I can't see a response in the chat, so I will give you the answer. When we talk about being ripped off in English, it means to be very expensive for what it is. So for example, we're going to talk about my pen again. It's a normal pen. It does the same thing as every other pen, but I paid 100 euros for this pen. It was very expensive and it doesn't do a lot. So I could say I was ripped off when I bought this pen. So Nariman has given an example. She has written, when she buys a laptop and it only works for 1 week. So a laptop is very expensive and it didn't work. So just to recap, to get ripped off is when you pay a lot for something that you should not have paid this amount of money for. So if I talk about a business example, let's say that I'm talking about my pen again, and I am making 100 pens, and I have to pay a company to make the ink inside the pen. If I can only buy from one company and they sell me the ink for 50 euros each pen, 50 euros for each pen, I could say I'm getting ripped off. So it's a common expression you may hear on TV or you may hear in business. Hopefully you have a better understanding of that. Okay, that might have been quite a difficult one. So let's talk about another one. Let's talk about this one here. What does it mean to make a living? What would it mean if I asked you, how do you make a living? Does anyone understand this idiom? What does it mean if I asked, how do you make a living? So I'll give you a couple of minutes to think about an answer. And again, I think idioms are important because if you go to a conference in an English speaking country, these kinds of questions are used regularly. And I want this lesson to try and help prepare you for more conversational English. Business is not all about business vocabulary, business this, product this. It's also conversational and getting to know each other. And it's very common in English that we use idioms like this. So I understand it might be difficult, but I promise it will help. And you can even try and write a sentence to explain and practice your English that way. So we have some answers. So Elodie has written, I work in a pharmaceutical industry. It's a very interesting sentence, Elodie, and I studied biochemistry when I was younger. So I am very interested by that. And Elodie is exactly right. When we talk about making a living, how do I make a living? It means what is your main source of income? Essentially, what is your job? So if you go to a conference or you're having an interview and they ask you, how do you make a living? They are asking you, what is your job? So if we have a look at some other examples to help explain the idiom, Ania has written down, I work as a guide. Fantastic, Ania. That's very interesting. And yeah, we're still waiting for some other answers. I can see Nariman also works in the pharmaceutical branch. So maybe Elodie and Nariman perhaps know each other. So fantastic. So to reiterate, how do you make a living is what job you have. So these are two examples of idioms related to our earnings and money. Let's talk about another category now, and that category is success. So success is when you have achieved something. This can also be personal. I achieved a a swimming certificate or a new website for my art project. It could also be in business. I succeeded in selling this to my client. So let's talk about some really common examples. I'm going to write down a question here for you all. And the question is, what does your company do to stay ahead of the curve? What does your company do to stay ahead of the curve? So the specific expression we're looking at here is to stay ahead of the curve. Now, this is a really important expression, and I think it shows a great value of professionalism and fluency if you were to use this in a meeting. For example, I will wait to give an explanation. I would just like to see how many of you understand this sentence. What does it mean to stay ahead of the curve? What does that mean in a business perspective? What does it mean when I ask, what does your company do to stay ahead of the curve? So if I try to explain or give some more context, a curve is a mathematical approach to graphs. A curve is when you have a y-axis and an x-axis, and a curve is something which shows your data quantitatively, so you can view different different trends in your specific title and job. So when we talk about staying ahead of the curve, we're using the curve almost like a metaphor for showing business productivity. So the idiom to stay ahead of the curve means to stay ahead of other businesses and other products. There are loads of different companies for pens. How can my company stay ahead of the curve? How can my company be better than the other companies? And the reason I use this example is because if you have a meeting at your office, you could say, or let's use my pen for an example. I'm in a meeting with my colleagues. I could say, I think we can get ahead of the curve if we design a different color or we try a pen with a different shape. It's a really professional way to start your pitch at a meeting. So to recap, to stay ahead of the curve is a really professional way to talk about being ahead of other companies. And this is what business is. It's about being uh, trying to push yourself and push yourself past other companies so you can succeed. So let's have a look at some suggestions on the chat. So Delphine is exactly correct to be the best company in comparison to your competitors. Elodie has written here, her company develops new medicines for COVID. So fantastic. So they're looking at the condition right now, the situation worldwide, and they're trying to find medications for other companies to stay ahead of the curve. Fantastic. And I wish you all the best, Elodie. Pauline, her company takes part in a lot of webinars, so a lot of online meetings, which is fantastic. And they talk about the updates of our industry. That's a really important point, Pauline, because if you want to be ahead of other businesses in your sector, you need to know about your industry too. So fantastic. And Naomi's company creates new projects in sports. Fantastic, Naomi. All the best to you as well. So the next idiom about success, I have written many different ones here. Okay, in the interest of time, let's move on because I think that's the most important idiom in regards to success. You can use it as a question and you can also use it to start your pitch in a meeting, as I suggested. So, staying ahead of the curve, being better than other companies. Sorry. The next category I'd like to talk about is time. So often when we have products that we need to release to our clients or products that we're trying to sell, it's really important to convey a time, a message of when you're able to fulfill the requirements for your product or business. I realize that I'm doing a lot of talking today. If anyone has any questions or they do not understand the content, please do write it in the chat and I'm happy to repeat an explanation. But these expressions are going to be really helpful for you when sounding more fluent in English. So, an expression or an idiom for time. People talk about racing against the clock. When was a time you have raced against the clock? What does this mean? Again, you may hear in a meeting that your boss is racing against the clock for something. What does that mean? What does it mean to be racing against the clock? So you could use this to describe a situation that you're working on. I won't give an answer yet. I'll just wait to hear some suggestions for what racing against the clock means. Okay, so you can have a guess. If you are not sure, it's really good to try and practice writing a sentence. So Sam, thank you very much for your comment. Sam has written here, does it mean time is running, so we have to finish quickly? And you're exactly right, Sam. We use racing against the clock if there is a deadline. Okay, for those of you who are unfamiliar with what a deadline is, it's a word we use to explain the time at a project or a goal must be achieved. So, for example, the deadline for me to finish my preparation for the YouTube live lessons is 3 p.m. before it starts. If I don't finish by the deadline at 3 p.m., I don't know what to teach to everyone. So Sam is exactly right. We use racing against the clock if we are close to our deadline and we haven't finished our responsibilities. For example, let's say that I'm doing or I'm preparing for my YouTube live. I normally write down what we're going to talk about today. I find some interesting facts. Let's say that the lesson starts at 3 p.m., but I start writing at 2:45. So I'll write this down for those of you who are unfamiliar with the time. So 3 p.m. is when the YouTube live starts, and I start writing my notes at 2:45. Start writing my notes at 2:45. So this means that I have 15 minutes to write all of my notes, and there are a lot. It takes me a long time to write down everything I need for the lesson. So if I started writing my notes at 2:45, I could say I'm racing against the clock. I'm saying that I don't have a lot of time to finish this report. Similarly, if we're in a meeting and let's talk about Samsung and iPhone. Both Samsung and iPhone develop and create mobile phones for us, the public. It's a race against the clock to release their phone first. Okay, so it's urgency, it's in relation to a deadline. If I have a look at some suggestions, for example, during an interview, we have a short time to speak. Exactly. There's a deadline. Let's say in a meeting that you don't have a lot of time, but you have a lot to talk about. It would be therefore correct to say you are racing against the clock. Okay. You can also talk about a product racing against the clock. If you have a deadline and an aim for when you want to finish and release your product, if you haven't finished it by this time, you could say that you are racing against the clock to release your product. Again, I hope that makes sense. And if there are any more questions, please do write it in the chat. But we also need to talk about one more category, the idioms. And as I mentioned, I have loads of different examples, but I'm trying to go through the most important ones that are used most regularly and the ones you can use easily in your business and in your workplace to describe a specific scenario. So, for example, Sam has written here, I'm racing against the clock because I have to prepare lunch for guests. If you are late, Sam, it would be entirely correct to say that. Now we have 3 minutes left of the lesson and I have more content to go through. So I am racing against the clock. So let's talk about the last idiom, and this is more for personal purposes. Okay, so the question is, what do you do to blow off steam? And I will explain the answer to this idiom. When we talk about blowing off steam, it means to release stress. So, for example, I release stress, I blow off steam by playing music and by taking photos. I explained the reason for this idiom as I wanted to see how everyone in the chat blows off steam. So normally we talk to colleagues, we can talk in conferences about blowing off steam. How do you blow off steam? So it's Friday. Everyone has the weekend off. We're going to be relaxing. Everyone or some people might have had a stressful week. But I guess another way to ask this question is, how are you going to relax? How are you going to release your stress? So how are you going to blow off steam? So Delphine is going to play some sport or do some sports. Well, what sports are you going to do, Delphine? I hope the weather gets better for your sport too. Sam has written here, listening to music or watching a movie is the best way to blow off steam. I definitely agree, Sam. I think listening to music is very relaxing, and watching a film with friends and family is equally as good. Thank you, Sam. Nariman has written, running is a good way to blow off steam. That's an excellent suggestion, and being active and doing exercise is a really good way to take your mind off stressful things. Great sentence. Anaris has written, she dances to de-stress. That's fantastic. I'm not a very good dancer, but I can imagine it's a form of exercise. It can help you relax. That's very interesting. Elodie, she runs, she practices sport, but Elodie also likes to listen to music. Fantastic. It's nice to see that everyone has many different ways of relaxing. And maybe we can all take inspiration from others in relaxing this weekend. So if I read through a couple more before we finish, Ania, reading and drinking wine, fantastic. Delphine, footing, yoga, and paddling in the sea. Fantastic. That's amazing. And Ellen does meditation and yoga. So loads of us have really good ways to release stress. I hope that everyone has an opportunity to release stress this weekend. And as always, thank you so much for joining in on the lessons today. It was really interesting to learn more about you. I've definitely taken some inspiration from ways to blow off steam. I hope you've learned something today. I understand it was difficult, but thank you very much for listening and trying to guess the meanings behind the idioms. I hope you all have a fantastic weekend and we'll see you all on Monday. Thank you very much. Goodbye.